Mike Jenkins's quiet evening erupted into chaos when two imposters in fake HOA uniforms demanded papers for his own home, threatening his family's safety. These audacious strangers wielded authority like a weapon, laughing at his protests and trying to intimidate him with fines and arrest. Yet with one decisive call to the sheriff, Mike turned the tables, bringing real law to intervene. But just wait until you see how this tense standoff unfolded and why, in the end, justice triumphed over fear. It started like any other quiet evening in the suburban calm of Willow Creek. Mike Jenkins had just settled into his favorite armchair with a cup of coffee, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint chirping of crickets outside, forming the comforting background of domestic life. His wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen putting away leftovers from dinner, and the kids were engrossed in their homework at the dining table. The new house still carried the faint smell of fresh paint, a reminder of the big step the family had taken to leave their cramped old apartment behind. Everything felt right, safe, predictable, and under their control. And then came the sound. A loud, rapid pounding on the front door shattered the evening calm. Mike's first thought was that it might be a neighbor with an emergency, but as he stood up and peered through the peephole, the sight made his stomach tighten with unease. Two men stood on his porch, dressed in dark blue uniforms with patches that read HOA Security. They looked official at first glance, but something about the way they carried themselves immediately set off alarm bells. One man's shoulders were rigid, the other's eyes darted nervously, betraying an impatience that didn't belong to anyone enforcing neighborhood rules respectfully. "Mr. Jenkins," one of them barked, voice loud and sharp. "We need to see your home ownership documents, now." Mike froze for a moment, processing the words. His pulse quickened. Home ownership had always come with rules and regulations, yes, but nothing in any agreement he had signed ever gave anyone the right to barge in unannounced, demanding to see private documents in such a confrontational manner. Something was wrong, profoundly wrong. He opened the door slightly, enough to keep a barrier between himself and the intruders, and spoke with controlled firmness. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but you need an appointment and proper identification. You cannot just demand to see my private documents." The men exchanged a glance, brief but telling. It was a look Mike had seen before. Men who believed that intimidation could replace law, who thought their assumed authority gave them the right to override anyone's common sense or rights. The man who had spoken stepped closer, the polished badge glinting under the porch light. "This is your only warning," he said. "You must comply or face consequences." Mike's hands tightened on the doorframe. The familiar comfort of his home felt violated, invaded by a sense of lawlessness that shouldn't exist in a peaceful neighborhood. Anger coursed through him, not the fleeting frustration of a minor inconvenience, but a deep, rising fury at the audacity of these men. How could anyone believe they had the right to threaten his family in their own home? How could someone attempt to make him feel powerless where he should feel safest? Every instinct told Mike to call the police immediately, but he also knew that reacting rashly could escalate the situation. His training, his experience, his sense of responsibility as a husband and father all collided in that moment. His anger, sharp and potent, fueled a steely clarity. He would not be intimidated. Not here, not in front of his family, not by men hiding behind fake authority. Even as his heart pounded and his mind raced, Mike kept his voice calm but unwavering. "You are not real officers," he said firmly, each word deliberate. "You have no right to threaten me or my family. Step back, or I will call the authorities." For a moment, the men hesitated. Their confidence faltered ever so slightly, a crack in the facade that Mike had recognized instantly. It was enough to remind him that courage and reason could be weapons as powerful as fear. Still, the pounding of his own pulse in his ears reminded him that this confrontation had only just begun. Anger burned hot and steady in his chest, but it was sharpened by purpose. This was his home, his family, and he would defend both without hesitation. The evening that had started as ordinary had transformed into a stage for an unseen battle where one man's steadfast resolve would meet the audacity of those claiming power they did not possess. And in that tension, Mike felt the first real surge of righteous anger that would carry him through the ordeal to come. Mike's voice trembled slightly, though he tried to keep it steady as he addressed the men on his porch. "I'm the lawful owner of this property," he said. "You have no right to demand my documents. You can't just barge in here and threaten me and my family." He held the door firmly, a barrier between the intruders and the haven he had worked so hard to create. But the men only laughed. It wasn't the polite, restrained laugh of someone in amusement. It was sharp, mocking, and designed to belittle. One of them leaned forward, his eyes cold behind the dark sunglasses, even though the sun had long set. "Fines, penalties, arrest. You'll pay if you don't comply," he sneered. There was a casual cruelty in their tone, a chilling belief that intimidation could bend the law to their will. Mike felt his stomach tighten. The initial anger that had surged when they first appeared on his porch now began to twist into something heavier: pain. This wasn't just about a confrontation. It was about helplessness. He looked behind him and saw Sarah's hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the kitchen counter, tears pooling in her eyes. The kids, 8-year-old Emily and 6-year-old Jacob, had crawled behind the couch, peeking through the cushions with wide, frightened eyes. Their innocent fear, the kind of fear that should never belong in a home, struck Mike to the core. He felt a deep, almost physical weight pressing down on him, a sensation like the air itself had thickened and pressed against his chest. Every laugh from the imposters, every threat hurled at him seemed to tighten an invisible vice around his family. The home that had once felt safe and welcoming now seemed fragile, vulnerable, as if any wrong move could shatter the fragile sense of security they had built. Mike tried again, his voice firmer now, tinged with desperation. "You are not real authorities. You cannot do this. Leave my property immediately." But the men's response was dismissive. One of them smirked and tapped the badge on his chest, a hollow imitation of legitimacy. "You think the law is on your side? Not when you're refusing a simple inspection." The words cut deeper than any physical threat could. Mike's mind raced as he considered the implications: his family's safety, the sanctity of their home, the sense of control over their own lives. All of it seemed suddenly fragile. like a house of cards waiting to topple. The helplessness gnawed at him, a slow, relentless ache. He wanted to protect his family, to shield them from this absurd yet terrifying ordeal, but he felt the limits of what he could do without outside help. Sarah's soft sobs filled the room behind him, a sound that tightened the ache in his chest. Emily whispered questions about whether these men could take them away, and Jacob clung to his mother's leg, trembling. The pain wasn't just physical, it was emotional, piercing. The raw awareness that people could be so brazen and lawless, that fear could invade the one place meant to be a refuge. Mike's hands were steady, but inside, the weight of responsibility pressed him down. Every second that the imposters stayed on the porch amplified the sense of injustice, the feeling that the world had tilted against him and his loved ones. Mike's mind swung between anger and despair. He thought about how many times he had imagined his life in this house. Laughter in the kitchen, homework at the table, quiet nights in the living room. And now, that vision was threatened by strangers who had no authority and no right. The pain of helplessness was suffocating, not just for him, but for everyone inside. And yet, within that pain, a seed of determination began to grow. He could not let this moment define the safety and peace of his home. Though the vice of injustice gripped him, he knew that clarity and action were possible. The pain was real, sharp, almost unbearable, but it was also the catalyst that would drive him toward the next step, finding help, reclaiming control, and protecting his family. In that moment, Mike understood the weight of lawlessness on ordinary lives. The imposters' threats were more than words. They were an assault on the trust, comfort, and security that every family deserved. The feeling of helplessness was excruciating, yet it also ignited a determination that would not be silenced. Mike's hands were still trembling as he reached for the phone. The imposters on his porch were still there, barking orders, but for the first time since they arrived, he felt a spark of control. His finger hovered over the emergency call button, and with a deep, steadying breath, he dialed the county sheriff's office. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, reassuring. Mike explained the situation, his words rushing out with a mix of fear and urgency. Strangers in fake uniforms threatening his family, claiming authority they didn't have. The dispatcher's response was immediate. "Stay inside, lock your doors, and keep your family safe. Officers are on their way." That simple assurance, so ordinary, yet so vital, sent a jolt of relief through Mike's chest. For the first time since the men had appeared, the tight weight of helplessness that had gripped him began to loosen. Hope, cautious but undeniable, threaded its way through the fear that had paralyzed his home. Minutes passed, though in Mike's mind it felt like hours. Every movement on the porch, the shuffle of feet, the rustle of paper, the imposters' whispered arguments, kept his heart racing. He peeked through the window blinds, his eyes searching for any sign of authority, any hint that the world outside his home was aligning with justice. And then, in the distance, the unmistakable flash of red and blue lights pierced the dusk. The imposters noticed it too. Their confident smirks faltered, their postures stiffened. One of them muttered something under his breath, and they began to edge toward the street, calculating their escape. But there was no place to run. The real officers arrived swiftly, moving with calm precision. Their presence alone reshaped the energy on Mike's porch. The tension that had been suffocating his home moments before now quivered with possibility, as if the air itself recognized that justice was reclaiming space. Mike's family emerged cautiously from the kitchen, Sarah still clutching the edge of the counter, Emily and Jacob cautiously stepping from behind the couch. The sheriff, a tall, composed figure named Officer Daniels, approached the imposters with authority that brooked no argument. "Step back and put your hands where I can see them," he instructed. The imposters froze, caught between flight and compliance. They had thought themselves in control, but the arrival of true law enforcement dissolved their illusion instantly. There was a tense pause, a heartbeat suspended in time, as Mike and his family watched. For the first time, the weight of fear that had hung over them began to lift. Hope was not just a feeling now. It was tangible, anchored in the presence of real authority and the promise that the law would act. The imposters, realizing the severity of their mistake, made no further threats. Their faces, once so bold and mocking, now betrayed unease, a dawning recognition that the consequences of their actions were unavoidable. The sheriff spoke to Mike calmly, reassuringly. "You did exactly the right thing by calling us. Impersonating law enforcement is a serious offense. It carries significant criminal penalties. Your family is safe now, and these individuals will be held accountable." Each word struck like a promise fulfilled, each sentence reinforcing that the nightmare was ending, that justice was present, active, and real. Mike's shoulders loosened. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding released in a slow exhale. Sarah's eyes, still wide, reflected relief rather than terror, and Emily and Jacob's tentative smiles returned. The imposters were being led to the patrol car, their bluff exposed, their intimidation dismantled. The sight was strangely empowering, even cathartic. The home, which had felt invaded and fragile, now felt solid once again, fortified by the knowledge that truth and authority had reclaimed their rightful place. In that moment, Mike realized something vital. Fear, no matter how intense, could be countered by action, by trust in justice, and by steadfastness. Hope was not passive. It was alive in the call for help, in the arrival of the sheriff, in the calm but firm restoration of order. Mike felt an emotional shift from despair to relief, from powerlessness to reassurance. The impostor's reign of intimidation had ended, and in its place was a quiet, profound sense of safety. For the first time that evening, Mike allowed himself to fully relax, to let the tension ebb. The law had arrived, hope had returned, and with it, the knowledge that no one, no matter how bold, could easily take away what was rightfully theirs. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the Jenkins suburban street. Inside the home, a new kind of quiet had settled, one not of fear or tension, but of relief and cautious joy. Mike Jenkins sank into the couch, exhausted yet invigorated, as Sarah wrapped her arms around him, still shaken but now free from the grip of terror. The kids, Emily and Jacob, cautiously emerged from their hiding spots, their wide eyes now filled with curiosity rather than fear. The imposters, who had terrorized them just moments ago, were now in the custody of the sheriff, escorted away in a patrol car that gleamed under the evening lights. Mike took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the adrenaline drain from his body. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not in bravado, but in the knowledge that he had protected what mattered most, his family. The house, once a stage for anxiety and intimidation, now radiated warmth and safety. It was a subtle, almost sacred shift, from a home invaded to a home defended. The weight of fear that had pressed down on every corner of the living room was lifted, replaced with gratitude and pride. In those quiet moments, Mike reflected on what had just transpired. Courage wasn't about confrontation for the sake of conflict. It was about recognizing injustice and refusing to accept it silently. Determination wasn't about stubbornness. It was about persistence and clarity in the face of uncertainty. The truth, he realized, always finds its way to the light, even when obscured by deception. The imposters had relied on fear, on the pretense of authority, but the real law had intervened, restoring balance and reminding everyone that integrity and justice remain more powerful than intimidation. Sarah smiled faintly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. "You did the right thing, Mike," she said softly. "We stayed calm. We stayed together, and it worked. The law came through." Mike nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The evening had tested them, but it had also revealed their strength. Together, as a family, they had endured uncertainty and fear, and emerged victorious. The story of the Jenkins ordeal didn't stay within the walls of their home for long. By the next morning, whispers had turned into conversations among neighbors, and conversations into a collective reflection on the importance of vigilance and advocacy. Mike's actions became a quiet inspiration throughout the community. People began to understand that standing up to injustice doesn't always mean heroic confrontation. Sometimes it's about making the right call, trusting the proper channels, and refusing to let fear dictate choices. The message was clear. Silence in the face of wrongdoing only empowers those who seek to intimidate, but courage, determination, and adherence to truth can restore order and dignity. Mike even shared a simple piece of advice with his neighbors. Know your rights, trust the system, and don't be afraid to ask for help. There's no shame in seeking support when someone threatens your safety or peace of mind. The law exists to protect you, and it works, if you have the courage to use it. His words resonated deeply, particularly because they came from someone who had felt genuine fear, uncertainty, and vulnerability. As the evening settled fully, the Jenkins family gathered around the dinner table, laughter slowly returning to the room. The air was filled with the sounds of normalcy, the subtle symphony of a family reclaiming its peace. Outside, neighbors walked by, exchanging nods and brief smiles, subtly acknowledging the power of community and the importance of standing up for one another. Mike gazed out the window at the quiet street, the patrol car long gone, and felt a surge of gratitude and inspiration. Triumph wasn't just about seeing the imposters taken away. It was about witnessing the restoration of safety, the reaffirmation of justice, and the lesson that courage can ripple beyond the immediate moment to influence others. Their story had become more than a personal victory. It had become a reminder to the community that vigilance, action, and integrity are always worth the effort. In the warmth of their home, with his family safe and his heart lighter than it had been all evening, Mike realized something essential. True strength is quiet, steadfast, and rooted in love and responsibility. And in that realization, he found inspiration, not only for himself, but for everyone who might face fear or injustice in their own lives. The Jenkins family had endured, prevailed, and inspired, showing that even in moments of uncertainty, courage paired with truth can illuminate the darkest situations. And that, Mike knew, was a lesson worth sharing for a lifetime.